Episode 1. The Prayer Journal with No Name. I hadn't been back to the house in 6 years. Not since the night she locked me outside in the rain and told me God would only open the door if I was clean. She never did. The town hadn't changed. Still too quiet. Still too heavy with the kind of silence that feels like everyone is listening behind curtains. The old chapel attached to our home was boarded up, a fire-blackened cross still nailed to its roof. They said the fire was electrical, but I knew better. The key didn't fight me when I slid it into the front door. It turned too easily, like the house had been waiting. It still smelled like incense, like something trying too hard to be holy. I walked past a mirror in the hallway, careful not to look into it. I didn't want to see what my face looked like in this place. Not after all these years. Not after everything she'd made me believe I was. I went to her bedroom first. Still immaculate. Still untouched. The crucifix above her bed was the only thing that looked disturbed. Crooked. Almost tired. And then I found the box. It was tucked under her bed, wrapped in a faded red shawl I remembered from my childhood. The one she wore on prayer nights when I wasn't allowed to speak. When I had to kneel outside her door and wait for forgiveness I never understood. Inside the box were journals. Maybe 20 of them. All the same size. All handwritten. Names. Dates. Requests. Miracles. Michael H. Stage for cancer, healed. Anna M. Suicidal ideation, peace restored. Father Gabriel. Faith wavering, dreams returned. Page after page of answered prayers. She had prayed for everyone. Everyone. I opened every book, scanned every page, looking for me. Nothing. Not once. Not Lucia. Not even my daughter. I was in the prayers. My heart pounded harder than I wanted it to. I told myself it didn't matter. She was cruel. She was devout in a way that swallowed love and spit out shame. Of course she wouldn't pray for me. I was a mistake she carried inside her body. The reminder. The burden. And then I found the last journal, tucked between the mattress and the headboard, as if hidden on purpose. Only one page was written in it. The final page. The rest were blank. The handwriting was hers, but it was frantic, slanted like she wrote it in fear. It just said, I tried not to, but she is waking. Below that my name, Lucia, but written backwards, Akel, and then a smear of red, dried, brown at the edges, blood. That was the first night I heard it. Not a sound, not a voice, a presence. The mirror in the hallway tilted as I passed by. The air turned cold, but only near her room. And at exactly 3:33 a.m., something knocked on the back wall of the house. 3 times. Slow, heavy, familiar, like it had done this before, and was waiting for me to remember. Episode 2. The woman in the mirror who knows my face. The mirror moved again last night. Not fell, not shifted. It moved. Tilted itself upright while I was brushing my teeth, like it wanted to see me more clearly. At first, I thought I was imagining it. This house plays with memory. That's what grief does when it's mixed with dread. It paints shadows where there are none and whispers where there's silence. But then she smiled at me, the woman in the mirror, and it wasn't my smile. It was wider, crooked, foreign, like someone using my face but forgetting how my muscles really work. I froze. My own reflection blinked, but I hadn't. I dropped the toothbrush. It hit the sink and cracked like a bone. I didn't scream. I don't know why. Maybe because some part of me expected this. Maybe because deep down, I knew that woman didn't arrive last night. She had always been there, watching, waiting. I spent the rest of the night sitting in my mother's prayer room, clutching the backwards journal. The name written in blood stared back at me like a curse I hadn't earned. Who writes their own daughter's name in blood? Who hides it? There was something else I noticed. Something I hadn't before. The page smelled like sulfur. Not old book mustiness. Not candle smoke. Sulfur. Rot. A scent that should never come from paper unless something unholy pressed into it. I lit a candle. Not because I believed it would protect me, but because the dark felt too eager, too alive. And I kept thinking, if she prayed for everyone else who prayed against me, that morning, I checked the mirror again. Normal. My face, my mouth, my eyes. Except there was a handprint on the glass. Not mine. Too small. A child's, but smudged in a spiral. A fingerprint pattern that spun inward instead of out. It made me feel dizzy just staring at it. So I went to the chapel. I hadn't opened that door in over a decade. It had been sealed since the fire. But I had the key. The one Father Gabriel gave my mother before he disappeared. When the lock clicked, something in the air shifted. Inside, it was colder than outside. Despite the sun, despite the holes in the roof, pews remained but melted. Wax had dripped over them like skin. The altar cloth was scorched, blackened into a shape like wings. And in the very back, behind where the confession booth used to be, I saw the mirror. Another one, tall, untouched, with a black frame, ornate, twisting into shapes I couldn't quite name. And then I saw her, in the mirror, not me, a girl, same age, same face, but not the same eyes. Hers were older, sadder, and angry. She mouthed a word, once. Then again, I leaned closer. I couldn't hear her, but I knew what she said. Why didn't she pray for us? I fell backward, cut my hand on a shard of wood. When I looked again, she was gone. Just my reflection, pale, trembling. But before I left, I saw something carved into the wall beside the mirror. She gave them light. She left us fire. I haven't slept since. Not really. Every time I close my eyes, I dream of standing in that mirror, trapped behind it, screaming at the girl on the other side, screaming to be let out. And sometimes I wake up facing the mirror in the hallway, even when I fall asleep on the couch, even when I lock my bedroom door. Something is moving beneath this house, something old, something that looks like me. And tomorrow, I'm going to dig under the confessional, because I think that's where my mother buried her last secret. Episode 3. Her prayers were spells, not blessings. My mother didn't pray. She cast. And I think I was her final offering. I spent the morning scraping dust off the floorboards beneath the old confessional. The chapel groaned like it resented my presence, like the walls remembered secrets better left buried. But I had to know, why wasn't I in her prayers? Why did the mirror remember someone else with my face? Why does my name only exist when written in reverse and in blood, though it came loose after hours? Behind the boards, I found a satchel, small, wrapped in crimson linen, tied with a rosary that had no cross, just a stone shaped like an eye. Inside were pages, torn from books, stitched together by hand, written in Latin, Spanish, and a language I couldn't name. And in the center, a portrait of me, drawn in charcoal, but not like a memory. It looked recent. My hair was short. The necklace I wore yesterday was on my neck, but my eyes were hollowed out, scratched with red ink. Beneath the image, a single line. She will carry the weight that broke us. I didn't recognize the handwriting, but the ink was the same color as the journal, and it smelled of sulfur. I went back to the house, back to the prayer room. I needed answers. Something. Anything. I opened her earliest journals. The prayers weren't prayers. Not really. They were transactions. Bring peace to Michael H.'s household. I offer silence from Lucia for 7 days. Restore vision to Aunt May. I will burn my daughter's voice for 1 week. Each request was followed by a cost, and every cost was tied to me. She didn't forget me. She used me. Every blessing someone received came from a piece of me she offered up without consent. My lost memories, my broken sleep, the inexplicable panic I carried into adulthood. They weren't random. They were paid for. The truth slid into my gut like rusted metal. Her prayers weren't to God. They were to something else. There were symbols I had never seen before, hidden between lines of scripture, crosses upside down and merged with crescent moons, eyes with no pupils, mouth sewn shut. The altar in the prayer room had been hollowed. Inside it, candles melted into the shape of a child, bones wrapped in cloth, teeth, and a jar with a tongue inside, floating, small, like it belonged to a child, like it had been taken. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The mirrors had started whispering. Not words, not voices, but breaths. Hot, slow, fogging the glass from the inside. I covered every reflective surface in the house. But at 3:33 a.m., the hallway mirror cracked itself, split straight through the center, like it was trying to open a door. And there she was again, the other me. She pressed her forehead to the glass and mouthed, "You're not the first." Then, "But you could be the last. I'm leaving in the morning, not to run, but to find the one person my mother never prayed for, but always feared. The midwife, the woman who delivered me in secret. The woman the town said had vanished. But I found her name written in the margins of the last journal, next to 3 words. She knows everything." Episode 4. Why the town hides when the church bells ring. The bells rang last night. No one sounded the alarm. No one pulled a rope. They just rang, and every light in town went out at once. I had just arrived in Santa Lena, the place on my birth certificate I was never allowed to ask about. A town with 1 gas station, 1 school, and a church that hasn't opened its doors since the year I was born. They say people move out of Santa Lena, but I swear no one ever really leaves. The midwife's name was Camila Herrera. I found her address in the corner of the journal, carved rather than written, as if my mother tried to erase it, but couldn't bring herself to destroy it completely. Her house sat at the edge of the woods, crooked and leaning as though it was trying to hide from the church tower that loomed at the town center. I knocked. No answer. I was about to walk away when the door creaked open by itself. Inside, a wall of candles melted to the floor. Pictures of babies, faceless, burned out at the eyes. And in the center, a cradle, empty. It wasn't dusty. It had been used recently. And then I saw the photo, taped to the mirror, a picture of me as a baby, wrapped in bloody cloth. Eyes shut, mouth stitched closed. Below it, a handwritten message. When they ring the bells, hide the marked one. She burns when blessed. I turned around, heart pounding. Camila was standing in the hallway, her eyes milky white, but she moved like she could see everything. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice like gravel soaked in guilt. "She gave you away to silence. You should have stayed forgotten." "Who is she?" I asked. "My mother?" Camila shook her head slowly. "No, your mother was just the vessel, the bride." She walked to the cradle and placed a red rosary in it, thorns woven into the beads. "Your real mother," she whispered, "has no name, only a sound, and it's rung into this town every time one of you is born." Outside, the bells rang again, not from the church. From under it, the sound didn't echo upward. It crawled to the ground, like something buried was trying to announce its resurrection. Camila began to cry. She pulled a crucifix from around her neck, snapped it in half, and tossed it into the fire. "She's waking up," she said. "You're the last one, Lucia. The final breath before the mouth opens." I backed away. "What mouth?" Camila's lips trembled. "The one beneath the altar, where your prayers were swallowed, and your soul was weighed." I didn't sleep in her house. I couldn't. At 3:33 a.m., the street lamps blinked out. The chapel bells rang again, this time with a deeper tone, like a scream in reverse. And every window in the village closed itself. People knew. They'd always known. This town fed her. Through my mother. Through silence. Through prayers disguised as protection. But I was never meant to return. I was supposed to stay lost. But now that I'm here, I need to know what lies beneath that church. I need to know what they buried under God's name. And tomorrow, I'm going to open the door they pretend isn't there. Episode 5. The baptism I was never meant to survive. There's a door beneath the altar. It was never meant to be found, but it was never sealed properly either. As if something underneath wanted to be remembered, The church stood like a mausoleum, elegant, crumbling, defiant in its silence. By day, it was just stone and shadow. By night, it breathed. Camila warned me not to go. She said the baptismal chamber had been closed since my birth, that the water turned black the moment my mother lowered me in. Some children screamed during baptism, she told me. You silenced the whole town. I went anyway. At midnight, I pushed open the heavy front doors. They moaned like they hadn't been touched in decades. Dust hung in the air like breath held too long. The altar loomed before me, cracked with time. Beneath it, barely visible, was a trapdoor, wood, rotted, stained with wax. And under that, a staircase, stone steps spiraling down like a throat. I descended into cold. The air below was thick, like soup. Every breath left a film on my tongue, like I was inhaling forgotten prayers. The chamber wasn't large, but it was sacred, or once was. At the center, the baptismal font. But the water inside wasn't water anymore. It shimmered like oil, thicker, darker, and something moved just beneath the surface, slow, like it was waiting for me to come closer. Carved into the stone were 7 names, all of them scratched out, except mine, Lucia, still intact, still etched cleanly, but beneath it one more line, rejected, returned, reserved. I felt the air shift, and the mirrors appeared again. There were 3 of them, set into the walls. One reflected me as a newborn, pale, wrapped in silk. The second, me as a child, knees bruised from forced kneeling. The third, me now, but I wasn't alone. Behind my reflection, I saw her, the other Lucia, eyes wide, mouth open, and dripping. She opened her mouth and poured out baptismal water, but it sizzled when it touched the mirror like acid. She stared at me and mouthed something over and over. It was never water. It was never water. It was never water. I turned to the font again. It had begun to bubble, and rising from it was a small, soaked cloth. The same cloth I was wrapped in the day I was born. Red, stiff, still wet after all these years. Inside it a tooth, tiny, human, with a string tied to it and a tag. Failed cleansing, unclaimed. I dropped the cloth, and the font laughed. Not loudly, not like a cackle, but like a child, deep and wet, with a voice that echoed too long for the size of the room. I ran, back up the stairs, back through the church. But before I reached the door, the bells rang. 3 times. And every candle in the church lit themselves. The flames burned black. And the voice of a girl, my voice but not mine, whispered through the pews. You were meant to drown, but you held your breath. And now you remember too much. Outside, the town was dark again. But I saw eyes watching from the windows, faces behind curtains. No one would come near the church. No one ever had, because they all knew the baptismal water was never meant to bless me. It was meant to contain me. Tomorrow, I'm going back to Camila. I need to know the truth about my father, because if my mother was the vessel, then what was he? And why does the church list me as unclaimed? Episode 6. My mother's voice in my dreams and in my skin. I heard her again last night, but not from the hallway, not from the mirror, from inside my body. It started in a dream. I was in her prayer room, but was younger, untouched, as it must have looked the year I was born. The walls were painted white. The crucifix above her altar still bled red wax on the base, like it always did during her devotion nights. My mother stood with her back to me, whispering, not to me, not to God, but to something beneath the floor. Her voice was calm, but hollow, like she was reciting a script carved into her bones. She will not scream this time, she said. She has no tongue to betray us. She carries the silence we traded for light. She turned. Her face wasn't burnt like in the funeral photos. It was smooth, unforgiving, and her eyes completely white. She looked at me and smiled. You've grown into the vessel well, Lucia, she said, but I did not give you a voice. I woke up gasping, sweat-soaked, But what startled me wasn't the dream. It was the itching on my ribs. I pulled up my shirt. There were words carved into my skin, faint, like ink under the surface. A language I couldn't understand, but burning. As I stared, the letters moved. They rearranged, and in English, they formed 3 words. She is listening. I ran to the mirror, half hoping it was cracked, that she, the other me, would be waiting. But the mirror showed only myself, until it didn't. Behind me, my mother's face, just inches over my shoulder, smiling. Her lips never moved, but I heard her voice clearly. You are remembering out of order. Stop digging, or I will have to take more. Camila arrived at the house before I could call her. She barged in without knocking. Her eyes were swollen, like she hadn't slept in days. You're marked, she said the moment she saw me. Your skin is reciting. She grabbed my arm, turned it over, gasped. You're halfway through the invocation. What invocation? I asked. Camila didn't answer. She walked straight to the mirror, pulled a rosary from her pocket, and smashed the glass. Inside the mirror, not behind it, inside, was a folded note. She pulled it out, trembling, written on the paper, in my mother's handwriting. If she hears her name, seal her throat. If she sees her other, cover all mirrors. If she begins to speak, bury her. Camila sat down, shaking. You were never meant to survive past the 6th awakening, she said. Your mother made a vow. She didn't break it. She redirected it, from sacrifice to storage. I stared at my arms. The marks were glowing faintly now, like veins of fire just beneath the surface. What's inside me? I asked. She looked at me. All of them. The prayers, the voices, the women who came before me. All the daughters she silenced. They were not erased. They were stored. And I am the archive. That night, I dreamt again. This time, I was the one kneeling, but not in prayer. My mother stood over me, holding a bowl. Inside it, pieces of hair, bone fragments, torn paper with names. She dipped her fingers into the bowl and touched my lips. You were never supposed to speak, she whispered. You were just supposed to carry. When I woke, the words on my skin had spread to my chest. The phrase was longer now. She is listening. She remembers her name. She wants her voice back. Tomorrow, I go to the cemetery. There's a grave with no name beside my mother's. Camila says it's mine. The first version. The one that didn't survive. But if that's true, then who the hell am I? Episode 7. The holy water that burns me. They say holy water cleanses. But when it touched my skin, it screamed. Camila gave me a bottle. She said it was blessed twice. Once by a priest, once by someone who remembered what faith was like before it got dirty. It's not for redemption, she warned. It's for revealing. She didn't tell me what it would reveal, but I already knew. I waited until midnight. The house was quiet. Still, watching. I lit a single candle, stood in front of the mirror I hadn't yet broken, and unbuttoned my shirt. The words were still there, ink beneath the skin, moving ever so slightly, like veins adjusting to a heartbeat not entirely mine. I opened the bottle. It smelled like metal and regret. And then I poured it over my chest. The burn was instant, not heat, but memory. As the water touched my skin, my vision fractured. I saw her, not me, but the other one, the girl with my face and someone else's sadness. She was in a crib, wrapped in white, crying, screaming, alone. Then hands lifted her, my mother's hands, but they were shaking. She dipped the baby in a stone basin. The water turned black the moment she touched it. Steam rose. The baby stopped moving. My mother gasped, whispered something in Latin, and then her face split into two in the reflection. One version began to cry. The other began to smile. The crying one said, "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." The smiling one said, "She took her first breath in fire. Now she must breathe for all of us." I screamed, back in my body, on the floor. My skin blistered where the water had touched me. And beneath the burns, The writing was gone. Burned off. Not healed. Removed. I stumbled to the bathroom, turned on the light, looked into the mirror. My reflection was wrong. Too still. Too slow. And then it blinked, but not in sync with me. She raised her hand. I didn't. She touched the mirror. So did I, but from fear, not mimicry. And when our fingers met the glass, she bled. A thin line of red traced down the mirror from her hand, but none appeared on mine. She mouthed a word. Second. Camila found me curled on the floor the next morning. She saw the burns, the melted bottle, the trail of blood I hadn't noticed. You did it, she whispered. You touched the baptism backwards. You cracked the tether. I asked her what that meant. She looked at me, tired. Hollow. It means she can't hide behind you anymore. But it also means she might try to trade places. That night, I returned to church. The doors were unlocked. The altar was clean. And the baptismal font, the one that once held black oil and secrets, was dry. But there, placed delicately inside it, was a single white rose, alive, untouched, but dripping red from its petals, and written on the inside of the basin, I died once already. Don't make me do it again. They say holy water burns demons, but it burned me first. So now I'm wondering, what exactly did my mother baptize into me? And if the first daughter died in that font, whose heartbeat have I been borrowing all along? Episode 8. A secret room behind the altar. They always said the church had no back room, but they lied. It was never missing, just sealed in silence. I returned just before dawn. Something about the rose and the baptismal font haunted me. How alive it looked, yet bled like memory, as if it had seen something, or remembered someone. The altar was colder than before, dustless, untouched, but I noticed a faint outline behind it. Carved symbols, invisible unless kissed by shadow. A circle, a flame, a child curled within it. Camila had drawn the same symbol once. After I'd asked her about the dream where my mouth was sewn shut, she called it the womb seal. A sigil used only when something divine was born. Wrong. I pressed my hand to the symbol. The wall pulsed. Once, twice, then slid open. Behind it, a hallway no longer than 5 steps. And at the end, a door made of blackened wood, bound in copper nails and red wax. Each nail etched with Latin phrases. I didn't understand the words, but I recognized a feeling. Warning, containment, regret. I pushed the door. It didn't creak. It exhaled. The room was small. Stone walls. One candle flickering on its own. No wind, no match. Just flame. And in the center, an altar made of bone. Not carved. Constructed. Skulls. Spines. Ribs tied together with rosary chains. Atop it, a box. Wooden. Ash stain. Sealed with wax and a tag. Lucia Maria Herrera. Returned to dust. April 6, 2001. My breath caught. That was my birth date. But this box wasn't symbolic. It was warm, like something inside had only just stopped breathing. I opened it, slowly, and inside, ash. Real, heavy, and not alone. Tucked inside the ashes was a baby's tooth, blackened, and a piece of cloth stitched with single phrase. The first failed. The second must remember. I stumbled back. Memories that weren't mine began flooding in. A scream in a language no one teaches. Hands over my face, mine but smaller. A woman's voice crying out, "Don't take her. I'll carry it instead." And then silence. A kind of silence that grows roots in your bones and never lets go. The candle dimmed, and from the corner of the room, a voice whispered, not like speech, but like prayer said through gritted teeth. She chose the ash. But you are the flame. I turned, but no one was there. Only a mirror, small, round, hung crooked on a rusted nail. I approached it, slowly, expecting her. But instead, I saw 2 of me, standing side by side. One smiled, the other wept. They whispered in unison. She burned the first to hide the birth of the second. but fire remembers its name. I left the room with shaking hands and ash on my fingers. Outside, the town was waking, but it felt like I had already buried the sunrise. Camila was waiting in the chapel pews. When she saw the box, she cried. I tried to stop her, she said. She made me swear to guard it, to never let you know. Know what? I asked. She looked at me. Hollow, that the child in that box is you, the version of you that didn't survive the baptism. I dropped the box. Ash scattered like snow, but the tooth, the blackened tooth, rolled and stopped at my foot. It pulsed. Once, twice, then cracked, and inside it was a drop of red. Fresh, alive. I'm not the only one who lived, and I'm starting to wonder, what if I'm not the second Lucia? What if I'm the third? Episode 9. Confessions of a Daughter Who Wasn't Wanted. There's a difference between being unloved and being offered. One leaves you empty. The other leaves something inside you that was never yours to carry. Camila found a notebook in a hidden panel behind my mother's headboard. It wasn't like the other prayer journals. No dates, no miracles, just page after page of confessions, but none addressed to God. They were written to the one beneath. And every entry began with the same 4 words. Forgive me, dark listener. The first page stopped my breath. I should not have kept her, but she was quiet in the womb, and the silence made me believe maybe this time the flame wouldn't spread. My hands trembled as I turned the pages. The voice in the writing was sharp, cold, too honest to be forgiven. She didn't write like a mother. She wrote like a priestess trying to appease a god she feared. She smiled at me before she could speak, but her eyes never looked at me. Always beyond, always deeper, like something else was watching from behind them. I tried to cut it out, the part that doesn't belong. But every prayer I burned only made her stronger. She began to hum the names of the others, the ones I buried in baptism. The candle beside me flickered violently, almost in rhythm with the words. Camila stepped back, her face pale. She didn't want you, she whispered. She wanted the debt you represented to go silent. She thought if she could confess enough, you'd never remember your original shape. I flipped to the last page. There in red ink, if she ever reads this, it means the words have returned to her skin. It means the mirror has accepted her as host. It means the third soul has awakened. The mirror in the room shattered. No wind, no impact. It broke as if the words themselves had weight. And in the shards, I didn't see myself anymore. Only a hallway, long, endless, lit by candles that flickered backward, flames dancing downward instead of up. And at the end of that hallway, a door marked with a symbol I had seen carved in the altar, a circle, a flame, a child curled inside it. Only this time it was open. I looked at Camila. What am I asked. She didn't speak for a long time. Then, you're not the sin. You're the sentence. I packed the journal, the ash box, the tooth, everything, because if the door has opened in the mirror, it means something is coming through, something she thought she could hide in me, something that remembers every confession, every sacrifice, every unwanted daughter, and it's coming to collect what was promised. Episode 10. The priest who never grew old. He was supposed to be dead. Father Gabriel. Buried 20 years ago after the fire at the chapel. I saw the newspaper clipping myself. His funeral. His name etched in stone. But the man in the photo I found last night, taken 2 weeks ago in a nearby town, was him. Uneged. Unchanged. Unburied. Camila never told me the full truth. She said she couldn't. But when I showed her the photo, she froze. Then she said something I didn't expect. He doesn't grow old because he never prayed forward. What does that mean? I asked. She looked at me, voice trembling. It means every blessing he gave was a withdrawal from someone else's time. I drove to the edge of the next county, an abandoned retreat for clergy once used by the diocese. But the gates weren't chained, and someone had lit candles in the window. The hallway smelled of lavender and ash, and in the chapel inside, He was waiting. Father Gabriel. Or, at least, something wearing his shape. He didn't flinch when I entered, just looked up from a blackened book and smiled like he'd been expecting me since before I was born. "I see she's broken the seal," he said, voice velvet and dust. I wondered how long her repentance would last. "You knew my mother," I said. "I made her," he replied, in faith, in function, in fear. He walked slowly toward me, hands folded like a man who once knew God but outlived him. She was the finest of the vessels, but she burned too hot, too early. You were her second try, or was it third? He leaned in and I smelled the truth on him. Sulfur, sanctuary, and something ancient, hungry. I held up the journal. She wrote to something she called the Dark Listener. "Was that you?" He laughed, not loudly, not cruelly, just tired. "I am not the listener," he said. "I am the mouth." The candle beside me flickered. The air grew thick. He pulled a key from around his neck, pressed it into my palm. "You came for answers, but you already carry them. You just need the place to read them aloud." "What place?" He nodded to a door at the back of the chapel, a door no one had opened since the fire. "But be warned, child," he said, walking back to the altar. "If you speak the names in that room, you won't be able to stop what remembers them." I opened the door anyway. Inside, a library of one book, chained to the wall, bound in red, covered in soot. But on the first page, my name, Lucia Maria Herrera, stamped in gold leaf. Below it, bearer of flame, custodian of the third tongue. I turned to the second page. It began to bleed. Not ink, blood. My blood. I felt it run from my nose, my fingertips, my tongue. And then I heard it, a voice not spoken in sound, but in memory. "You were never meant to ask, only to hold, only to hum." I stumbled back, slammed the book shut, and behind me, Father Gabriel whispered, "She's waking inside you now, isn't she?" I looked up. His eyes had turned black. No iris, no light, just depth. "You don't need me anymore," he said. "Your prayers are loud enough now. She hears you directly." When I stepped out of the chapel, the sky was darker than it should have been, and in the distance, the bell tower back in my hometown began to ring. But no one pulled the rope, because this time, the sound didn't come from the bell. It came from beneath it. Episode 11, Blood on the Hymn Book. I never remembered her voice. Not truly. Not in lullabies. Not in laughter. Not even in anger. Only in whispers. Only in silence that pressed too tightly against the walls. But last night, I heard her sing, and what she sang wasn't prayer. I returned to the burned chapel alone. Camila begged me not to go, said the fire was an accident. It was a seal, a ritual of flame to silence what had already begun to hum to the bones of the church. But the bells rang again last night, 12 chimes at midnight. No tower, no wind, just the sound of something old, remembering its own name. The church was cold when I entered, colder than it should have been for spring. Charred wood, fractured pews, the stone altar cracked straight down the middle like a heart split by confession. But something had changed. The old organ, destroyed in the fire, was standing again, unburned, breathing, and playing by itself. One single note, held far too long. Low, hollow, almost like a throat trying to remember speech. At the base of the altar was a book, thicker than any hymnal I'd seen, bound in white leather, now stained deep crimson, as if it had soaked in someone's final act. I picked it up. It was open to a page titled, Canticle for the Unborn Flame. No composer, no page number, no notation in any earthly scale. The notes were jagged, upside down, moving in spirals instead of lines. And beneath the final stanza, my mother's signature, but written backward. I traced the words with trembling fingers. Suddenly, the walls exhaled. The floor creaked beneath me, not from weight, but recognition. And the hymn began to sing through me, not with my voice, but hers. My mother's voice rose from my throat like smoke, smooth, controlled, but broken at the edges. I couldn't stop it. Even as tears fell, even as my hands trembled, even as blood began to drip from the corners of the book, I sang, "She who was burned shall rise in flame. In daughter's blood, she speaks her name." The words weren't Latin, weren't English. They belonged to something older. And when the final note left my lips, something answered. The ground beneath the altar split, not violently, delicately, like a mouth slowly opening to receive communion. From it rose a scent I'd smelled before, sulfur, charred cloth, and lavender, and then a voice, clear, unquestioning. Lucia, not a question, a claim. The air thickened. The hymn book caught flame in my hands. But the fire didn't burn me. It folded itself into my palms, branded something beneath my skin. I looked down. Where the notes had been, a new phrase was forming on my flesh. "You are the final verse." I ran from the chapel, but the music followed. It didn't echo. It attached itself. Every surface I passed hummed with a melody. Mirrors, windows, the trees. And in each reflection, she stared at me. Not the other Lucia, not the infant that died, but the original voice. The one my mother had tried to erase with prayers she never meant. And this time, she was singing with me. I'm not just a vessel. I'm not just a flame. I am the unfinished song. And now that it's begun again, it won't end until the name beneath the melody is spoken. Episode 12, my mother's last prayer. It wasn't a prayer. It was a bargain. And she didn't pray for me. She prayed against the truth of me. Camila handed me the envelope at dawn, sealed in black wax, stamped with a symbol I'd seen too many times now. A circle, a flame, a child turned inward. "I wasn't supposed to give this to you," she said. "It was meant to be buried with her." "But wasn't," I replied. Camila nodded slowly. "No, because even the grave was afraid of what she wrote. The paper inside was brittle, yellow with something more than age, not ink, but something darker soaked into its lines, like tears or blood. At the top of the page, one sentence. "To the one who listens below, this is my final offering." It wasn't structured like a prayer. No, dear Father. No, man. Just words, raw, honest, desperate. A confession braided into a transaction. The second child was never meant to live. But she was born with silence in her lungs, and that silence pleased you. I swore I'd raise her in shadows, unspoken, unnamed. But she began to dream, and her dream smelled like fire. So I give you my name. Bind it to hers. Let her forget what she is. Let her carry my sins instead of her own. Just give her time. Just give her breath. Enough to walk. Enough to burn quietly. She gave me her name. Not as legacy. As leash. That's why mirrors break. Why the flame never kills me. Why I've lived a life full of echoes that never belonged to me. Because the person known as Lucia Maria Herrera was never supposed to exist as herself. She gave me her name, so that mine could be forgotten. And now that I'm remembering, everything is unraveling. I looked at my reflection, my face, my eyes, but behind them, there was something else now. A voice. It didn't whisper. It sang. The same melody from the hymn book, but slower, sadder, like a lullaby for a god that used to be human. Camila burned the letter after I read it, not to destroy the truth, but to return it. "The last prayer was not for you," she said. "It was the price." "And the payment?" I asked. Her hands shook. "You. There are names no one should speak, not because they curse, but because they call. And tomorrow, I'm going back to the altar, not to kneel, not to confess, but to say the name my mother erased from me, the name she buried beneath hers. And when I say it, we'll both know which of us was truly born, and which of us was just borrowed flame." Episode 13, rewriting the final page. They said the book was bound in prophecy, that no one could rewrite what had been inked in blood, but they forgot something. Blood belongs to the body, and the body is mine now. I returned to the altar with my hands wrapped in gauze. My voice still humming the song I didn't remember learning. The hymn hadn't stopped since I read her last prayer. It lived in my breath, in the silence between footsteps, in the way mirrors now tilted toward me, not to reflect, but to witness. The chapel was empty, or pretending to be. The walls seemed to breathe, slowly. Inhale, exhale, like something beneath the floorboards was counting down. The hymn book, long burned in the last episode, was waiting on the altar, whole again, but the ink had changed. Instead of red, it was silver, flickering, moving across the page as if the words were still deciding what to say. I opened to the final page and saw this. The daughter sings, but the flame chooses. Only one can carry the last name. Below that, an empty line, a space meant for a name. Not mine, not hers, but the one we'd been fighting for. My fingers trembled. I unwrapped the gauze, took the bone knife Camila had given me, and pressed it to the center of my palm. Not to bleed, but to write, with blood that remembered. Each letter I drew felt like a memory unlocking itself. A crib, a scream, hands in prayer over a fire, not a cradle. My mother's face, younger, afraid, singing lullabies with no melody, just rhythm and rules. I kept writing, the letters twisted, half in Latin, half in something older than sound. And finally, the name, my name, the true one, the one that had been buried under layers of prayers, baptisms, and borrowed time. The book shook, the altar cracked, and behind me, the mirror screamed, not broke, screamed, as if glass could voice agony. The reflection no longer showed the chapel. It showed a room of endless doors, each with a version of me behind it, crying, smiling, burning, and at the center of the mirror, her, the other. She stepped forward, no longer flickering, no longer a ghost, real, whole, dressed in ash and bone. You shouldn't have written it, she said. You shouldn't have remembered it. I stared at her, felt the knife still warm in my palm, felt the book close itself, and I whispered back, you shouldn't have taken my place. She lunged. The mirror shattered inward, as if collapsing into her. Glass and shadow exploded into me, not cutting, but merging. And for the first time, I saw her for who she was. Not an echo, not a demon, just the part of me that was made to be silent, the part my mother carved away, the name she fed to something beneath the chapel in exchange for a heartbeat. We stood together now, one voice, one breath, and in the ashes of the altar, the book opened again. The final page now said, name reclaimed, flame unbound. The daughter writes her own ending. I walked out of the chapel barefoot, blood trailing behind me like punctuation. Camila was waiting by the gate, eyes wide, hands shaking. Did it work? She asked. I looked up at the sky. It was darker than midnight, but I felt no fear. Not yet, I said. First, I have to burn the name she left behind. Episode 14, becoming the prayer she refused to say. She never said my name in prayer. But now, I carry every syllable like a wound that hums. The chapel is ashes. The mirrors are dust. The name is mine again. But with it came everything she buried with it. Every daughter, every silence, every sentence whispered beneath her breath while my body slept. I feel them now, not voices, but vibrations under my skin, and they want to be released. Camila told me there's one place left, a shrine, hidden deep in the roots of the original church, long collapsed, before the town was paved, before names were recorded, back when prayers were carved into flesh, not paper. We descended at night. No flashlight, no flame, just instinct. The deeper we went, the more the air began to hum. Not a tune, but a resonance that matched the beat of my pulse. I wasn't afraid, because I finally understood. She didn't refuse to pray for me out of hatred. She refused because she couldn't. I wasn't meant to be prayed for. I was meant to be prayed through. At the end of the tunnel, we found a room, round, hollow, covered in old language no longer taught. Symbols like tears frozen into stone. At the center, a stone slab, shaped like a child in the womb. Above it, an inscription in blood that had never dried. Let her be the Amen. I lay down on the slab. My skin began to heat. Not burn, awaken. The writing returned, curling across my ribs, my throat, the inside of my palms. Camila stood above me, tears in her eyes. There's no going back after this, she said. I know. You're not becoming a savior, Lucia. I don't need to be. She looked at me, confused, and I smiled. I'm becoming the thing she feared I'd remember. The ground shook, the ceiling cracked, and then they came, one by one, the faces of girls, of women, of daughters unnamed. Some were shadows, some only voices. All of them flickered in and out of the stone walls, like memories dying for breath. They surrounded me, and they sang. But this wasn't the hymn of the altar. It was older, richer, built from ache. A song that hadn't been sung in generations because it required a voice that bled truth. I opened my mouth, and I gave it. The words weren't mine. They were ours. All of us. The unheard, the forgotten, the sacrificed. My voice was the altar, my body the scroll, and my blood, the ink that rewrote every page she tried to burn. The stone slab cracked beneath me. From the break, a red light spilled upward, rising into the ceiling, curling into the shape of a flame that finally spelled the word. Amen. Camila fell to her knees, crying, not from fear, but from something she hadn't known she still carried. Hope, not the false hope written in books, but the raw hope that maybe, just maybe, a prayer could come from pain and still be holy. I stood. The symbols on my skin were gone, but I was still glowing from the inside. I had said the prayer. I had become the prayer, and the one she left in me. The daughters, the names, the humming ghosts. They were free now. Not gone, not forgotten. Just finally their own. Episode 15. The day I died in her name. I didn't die in blood. I didn't die in fire. I died in the place where she first said my name out loud. And she said it not as a mother, but as a sacrifice. The sky was ash gray as I returned to the house. The one with the sealed mirror. The broken cradle. The room that hummed when I breathed too loudly. I hadn't stepped inside since the day to him took hold of my bones. But I had one thing left to do. One page left to tear from her story. And I had to do it where it all began. I found the prayer shawl folded neatly on her bed. The same one she wore when she offered me up. I didn't touch it, just stared at it, like it might whisper back if I got too close. And then I heard her voice, soft, younger, not like in the journals or the confessions. This was the voice of a girl, not yet a mother, not yet broken. I only wanted to be clean, but the flame came through me, and it left its name behind. I followed the sound to her old mirror, cracked, warped, but no longer empty. She was there, standing in a dress of ash, hands folded, eyes full of 100 regrets too late to matter. She spoke without moving her lips. You carry it better than I did. You held it without burning. I only ever sang to bury it. You sang to set it free. I stepped closer, and for the first time, I didn't flinch at her reflection, because I saw it now. She wasn't a monster, just a match. And I was the spark she never let ignite. There was only one name left in the journal, hers, written at the bottom of the final page, trembling, incomplete, as if she couldn't finish it without my permission. I picked up the pen, cut my palm one last time, and I finished it for her. Lucia Maria Herrera, returned, forgiven, released. The moment the blood touched the paper, the house groaned, not in pain, but in relief. Like a long-held breath finally exhaled, and I felt it, the weight of her expectations leave my spine, the echo of her fears fall out of my lungs. The name I had carried, the name she gave me, died quietly in that room. I stepped outside as the sky turned violet. The mirror behind me cracked once more, then turned to dust. Camila was waiting at the gate, but she didn't ask questions. She simply looked at me and said, "You're not hers anymore." I smiled. "No," I said, "I never was. I just wore her prayer long enough for it to find its end." And as the first light of morning touched my face, I whispered a name I had never dared speak aloud. My true name, the one I remembered before her, before the altar, before the hymn. And I said it not with fear, but with power, because now I was no longer someone's offering. I was my own resurrection.